Hello, I hope you're having a good day. Today we'll talk about a story in which a scientist specialized in snakes transforms all his test subjects into hybrid serpents. So today we'll watch SSSSS. Dr. Carl injected snake genes into the body of his assistant Tim, hoping to alter Tim's original genetics. Unaware, Tim thought it was some kind of vaccine. Afterward, Tim's body began to change slowly. Fiorest. He shed his skin like a snake. Then scales began growing on his body until he finally turned into a terrifying human-snake hybrid. However, Carl wasn't satisfied because his ultimate goal was to turn humans completely into snakes. This failed experiment was then sold to a circus for cheap, attracting countless viewers to come see him. No one knew that this monster wasn't just wearing a costume. Tim is forced to become the moneymaker for the circus owner when he tries to ask for help, but can't speak. Meanwhile, Carl began looking for his next subject. He arrives at school pretending to hire a new assistant and meets his old friend Ken, who wants him to recommend a student. Ken was a bit puzzled because, as far as he knew, Carl already had an assistant, so why did he suddenly want to replace him? But Carl lied, saying the previous one had resigned. After hearing this, Ken didn't give it much thought and recommended his student David. David, already interested in biology, was eager to help and excitedly followed Carl home after school. Seeing Christina, Carl's beautiful daughter, made David even happier to be Carl's assistant. He didn't know this would be the most regretful decision of his life. Then Carl took David to his lab and explained his research in detail. Carl's main focus was on snakes. To tell the danger level between them apart, he labeled each snake's box with a color-coded tag. Green meant non-venomous, yellow meant venomous, and red meant highly venomous. However, most venomous snakes had corresponding antidotes. As long as the antidote was injected right after a bite, the person could be saved. After explaining, Carl brought out a black mamba from Africa to teach David how to extract its venom. The black mamba's venom was extremely lethal. A single drop could kill 10 adults. Being the fastest snake in the world, a black mamba bite without antidote would cause death in an hour, with symptoms similar to a heart attack. After hearing Carl's explanation, David wasn't scared but eager to get started. But Carl said before working, a snake venom vaccine had to be injected, which, along with the antidote, would ensure no accidents. Without thinking much, David went ahead with the injection, unaware he had unknowingly become Carl's experiment subject. The vaccine injected into David was actually a genetic potion developed by Carl using the king cobra. Carl also took the chance to introduce David to the king cobra. The king cobra is considered one of the world's most dangerous creatures, even more venomous than the black mamba. With bites so deadly, there's no time to inject antidote. But even a creature this dangerous has a natural enemy, the famous mongoose. Later, while eating, the drug Carl injected began to take effect, making David feel dizzy and sick. But Carl falsely claimed it was a normal vaccine reaction. Then, with help from Carl and Christina, they helped David lie down. While sleeping, David felt unbearable heat and slept until the next morning. When he woke up, David saw a crowd outside. Carl was doing his usual snake charming performance, attracting townspeople to watch. That day's act was to catch a king cobra by hand. Despite Carl's vast experience, he was a bit nervous facing the king cobra, since a bite could be instantly fatal. Just as he was about to succeed, a man began taking pictures, nearly causing the cobra to bite Carl. However, Carl managed to complete the act and successfully extracted the king cobra's venom. The audience applauded the spectacular show, and Carl received many tips. That's how Carl gets funding for his research. However, a few days later, David woke up and discovered the skin on his face was peeling off. He quickly looked for Carl for answers. While treating David's skin, Carl said the shedding was a natural vaccine reaction and assured him it meant it was working, telling him not to worry. But David felt an unusual chill, which Carl dismissed and told him to wear a jacket, unaware he was turning cold-blooded. Since Tim, Carl's ex-assistant, had vanished, His family decided to call the police, so 2 officers soon arrived at Carl's home and wanted to speak with him. Carl claimed Tim had resigned a while ago and calmly showed the officers his lab. Seeing Christina taming a python, the officers even helped carry the snake to the basement. After a short inspection and finding nothing strange, the officers quickly left. As soon as they left, Carl returned to the lab to continue injecting David with the so-called vaccine, telling him this process would continue daily for a month. After a month, David would be fully involved in his research. While spending time with Christina, David developed feelings for her, and Christina fell for David. Apparently, Christina didn't know what her father was doing to David. On a walk, they confirmed their relationship and playfully splashed in the river. On their way home, they saw a circus performing and were intrigued by a freak show advertised by the circus owner, who claimed to have a real snake man. Christina was skeptical, thinking it was a scam, while David, intrigued, paid $2.50 to enter. Though the monsters inside were clearly disguised humans, the so-called snake man looked incredibly real, especially his snake-like eyes. David wanted to tell Christina but discovered Steve was harassing her. Without a word, Steve intimidated David with a show of strength and then kicked him out. After getting up, David didn't hesitate at all and immediately attacked Steve. But the size difference was too great and David was no match for him. Frustrated, David bit Steve on the neck, causing him pain and making him let go. The police arrived shortly after to break up the fight. But as soon as they got home, a relentless Steve followed them, eyeing Christina's silhouette in the upstairs bedroom with bad intentions. Climbing the wall to the window, Steve was about to attack Christina. Unexpectedly, a python on the table instantly coiled around Steve's arm, startling him and making him fall from the second floor. Fortunately, Steve wasn't seriously hurt, but the poor python was beaten to death. Carl and David arrived just in time to witness the scene. Steve, thinking the family was deranged, quickly fled the scene on his motorcycle. Christina was devastated by the death of the python, her gentlest pet. The next day, they cremated the python and Carl secretly vowed to make Steve pay. Carl quietly returned to his lab, took out the deadly black mamba, and placed it in a bag. He waited until dusk and left in his car. At that time, Steve was getting cozy with his girlfriend, Kitty, unaware of the looming danger. Soon, Carl arrived at Steve's house and saw Kitty leaving. After Kitty left, Carl sneaked into the house. Finding Steve in the shower, Carl deliberately released the black mamba into the bathroom. Steve noticed something was wrong too late, and the black mamba bit his foot. After struggling for a moment, Steve stopped moving entirely. Carl quickly retrieved the black mamba and left the scene with a smug look on his face. Meanwhile, David and Christina had an intimate encounter behind Carl's back. Returning home, Carl saw the clothes scattered and instantly knew what had happened. Carl went to Christina's room and openly scolded her. He wasn't against her dating, but disapproved of her being with David. Only he knew David's body was changing, fearing he'd become something horrible. However, faced with Christina's questions, Carl hesitated and chose to keep everything hidden. This led to an argument between them. But the next morning, David noticed more snake scales appearing on his arm and his body worsening. Christina, who wanted to check on him, was stopped by Carl at the door. He lied, saying David was in the final stage of vaccine adaptation and shouldn't be disturbed. To ensure the experiment went smoothly, Carl also tricked Christina into driving to the city to pick up a shipment of foreign venomous snakes. Christina didn't think much of it and left. Shortly after she left, Carl gave David a potion, claiming it would ease his symptoms. David, reluctant but fearing his condition would worsen, decided to trust Carl. After drinking the potion, David didn't improve but instead felt unbearable abdominal pain, as if his internal organs were shifting. David wanted to go to the hospital, but Carl, of course, disagreed and forcibly injected him with another potion. At that moment, the sound of a car outside startled Carl, fearing his secrets would be exposed. It turned out to be Ken, who was taking the day off to attend a student's funeral and decided to check on David. That student was Steve, who had been poisoned by Carl. Everyone thought Steve died of a heart attack, unaware Carl was the killer. Ken wanted to see David and leave, but Carl denied him entry with several excuses. Reluctantly, Ken decided to leave. However, shortly after, Ken felt something was off and decided to sneak through the back mountain to investigate. Unaware, Carl, who had just returned to the lab, saw what he was doing. To keep his plans from being exposed, Carl decided Ken had to be silenced. He quietly took a weight and sneaked outside. When Ken reached the lab window, he saw David inside, already fully mutated. Before Ken could even express surprise, Carl struck him from behind. Seeing this, David was terrified, but his mutation prevented him from escaping. Poor Ken was locked in the basement and chained up by Carl, and Ken threatened Carl with exposure over his twisted research. But Carl had no intention of talking to Ken. He turned around and left the basement, leaving the rest to the large python that lived there. When Carl returned, the python had completely swallowed Ken. Meanwhile, Christina reached the shipping department and was told that Carl had no delivery from abroad. When his daughter asked about it, Carl insisted the package might not have arrived and asked her to wait longer at the shipping office. Hearing Christina's interest in snakes, the owner suggested she visit the circus to see the freak show, which featured a half-human, half-snake creature he claimed was the most realistic snake man he'd ever seen, looking like the real thing. Convinced by the owner's description, Christina decided to see for herself, but when she arrived, the circus had already closed, and the owner told her to return the next day. However, not wanting the trip to be wasted, Christina sneaked in while they were distracted. The moment she saw the snake man, she was completely shocked to recognize him as her father's former assistant, Tim. At that moment, Christina realized her father had been performing human modification experiments all along, hiding them from her. Linking her father's strange behavior with David's recent physical changes, Christina knew David had also fallen victim to her father's plans. Before the owner could catch her, Christina rushed home by car. Meanwhile, Steve's girlfriend, Kitty, went to the police to report her suspicion that Steve's death wasn't accidental. It turned out Steve had told Kitty what happened that night, and that he killed a python. So Kitty suspected Steve's death was connected to Carl's family. At first, the police were skeptical, but then they received another call from Ken's family, reporting that Ken hadn't returned after visiting Carl's house. All clues pointed to Carl, leading the police to suspect him and rush to his home. At that moment, Carl was busy with his experiment, tying David to the lab table and injecting him with another potion, muttering strange things. Carl told David he should be grateful for his transformation, claiming he was becoming a new human being, the greatest evolution in mankind's history, capable of surviving in any hostile environment. By then, David's ability to speak had completely degenerated, leaving him unable to resist. Then, as Carl watched in awe, David completed his final transformation. First, David's head slowly turned into a snake's head, then his legs began to merge into a serpent's tail, and finally, David's entire body became that of a snake. Carl's goal was to create a new species, but unexpectedly he had turned David directly into a king cobra. To test David's combat abilities, Carl released another king cobra, preparing for a battle of the serpent kings. But before the fight began, Carl was accidentally bitten by the king cobra, and the venom quickly spread throughout his body. With no antidote prepared, Carl died from the venom. Though he didn't witness the king snake battle, an even fiercer fight was about to erupt in the lab. Upon seeing David, now a king cobra, slithering around, the mongoose couldn't hold back its instinct and unexpectedly opened its cage, charging directly at David. When Christina finally arrived home, she was greeted by her father's cold corpse. The king cobra hadn't left and tried to attack Christina, but the police arrived just in time and shot the cobra dead. Running toward the lab thinking of David, Christina saw a mongoose biting at his neck, trying to kill him. Despite having transformed, David still wasn't a match for the mongoose, and the story ends there. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Let me know your favorite part in the comments. Well, see you next time. Goodbye.